Okay, so I'm hoping this is recording. Yeah, so recording started. So yeah, this is I'm basically going to do a tutorial on how we prepare our plans in QGIS. Kind of starting from the very start, kind of what software we use, where we get the data from, how we input that data, how we manipulate the data, how we present the data. Because as part of our reports for both due diligence, home buyers reports, and flood risk assessments, we prepare these set of GIS plans to help the client, the homeowner, to understand the risk a bit better. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of go from here. So the first thing to say is we use a bit of open source software called QGIS. So the first thing you'll need to do is download QGIS. So I've searched here QGIS long-term release. So QGIS is an open source bit of software, so people constantly contribute and kind of add their extra input into the bits of software. So it's constantly being updated. So the best thing to do is to download the long-term release. So basically there's different versions which pop up every month or so, but it's always best to go for what we call the long-term release because it tends to be the most stable and reliable. So if you search long-term release, if you search QGIS long-term release and it come up on this website, and you'll see the main one is wanting to download version 3.28, which is a more recent version than version 3.22, but 3.22 is the long-term release. So click on that one and download it. So you don't need to do that now, but you know, when you go through and do that another point, it'll take a while to download and install.
So download.
Yeah. So I'll open it up. I've got it on my desktop. So I've got, here we go, QGIS desktop 3.2.2210, which is the long-term release. So I'll just open it up and you can have a look, see kind of what it shows. Let's give it a second. Typically being slow when I need it to be quick. Okay, so I'll just bring it across. So when you open QGIS, you get this page. So you've got untitled project, and there's nothing there. So what we want to do is we want to start kind of a blank new project, and then you've suddenly got a blank screen. So first thing to do is always to save it. So I'm just going to go in, I don't know, we'll just go in, let's go in my FPS folder here, and I'll just call it, just going to create a folder, GIS tutorial. Basically, you want to just give it a brief name relative to the project. So the site I'm going to use here is in Witney, Oxfordshire. So I'm just going to call it Witney GIS plans and save it. So then you've got your model space saved. Within here, you'll see there's quite a few things on the toolbar, but some of these are kind of additional plugins which I've added in. So the key plugin that you first want to install is what's called the Tile Plus plugin. So if you go to the bar at the top and go to plugin, you can click on manage and install plugins, and then it'll open up a separate window. And then the one to search for is called Tile Plus. And you want to install this plugin basically. And it'll allow you to download it and install it. It should be on this list in here. If not, you might have to search it online. Sometimes the plugins don't appear there, so you might have to go and search. If you just go on Google and search QGIS Tile Plus plugin, and there you go. You see there's a link here, so you can do it on. If it doesn't appear in the plugin list, you could go online and download it. So there's a zip file here on this web page where you can download it. So the good thing about that plugin, just going back into GIS, is it means you can open up some base maps. So sorry, I'll just do that. If you click on the plugin icon, the Tile Plus plugin, you'll see that there's then a little pop-up box where you can select various different maps. So there's Google Maps, Google Satellite, OpenStreetMap. So it's usually always best to select the OpenStreetMap's a good one. So you just need to select that layer and then just click plus, and you'll see we've got a world map up here. Another one to add that we typically use is Google Satellite. So if you select Google Satellite and click plus, Google Satellite then appears. So you see you've got a layers list over the left hand side with the little ticks. So you can turn layers on and off by just ticking and unticking them. So yeah. So we've got these two main layers. So we can now go find our site. So the best way, OpenStreetMap's just is a good initial tool. So I'm going to zoom in here and find where the site which I'm looking for, which is in Whitney. So Whitney's a little town just to the west of Oxfordshire, just west of Oxford.
Yeah, and in this case, can you write? Input the postcode to find it, or we have to zoom in?
No, so basically, what you'd want to do is you'd want to search in Google Maps. So you could go online. So I could go on Google Maps online here. I could search Whitney, Oxfordshire. Again, I'm gonna use this in a minute. So just go on Google Maps online, and then find the relative position, and you have to zoom in. There's no postcode or location search in GIS. You just kind of got to zoom into the location you're at. So as I say, you can zoom in. I've searched Whitney, Oxfordshire on Google Maps here, and then I just need to zoom into the same location. So yeah, I've zoomed in here, and I can turn on the Google Maps layer and I can see the satellite image as well. So I'm gonna select a random site basically to do a review of the flood risk. This is close to a site where we've already done an assessment, so they make it a bit easy because I know we've got the data basically. So I think we'll go for, I don't know, we'll have a look on this map back here. We'll try and pick one near the river because obviously we'll have some data there. Let's see. I don't know. We could do this one. Halfords Auto Centre, right next to the river. So this is the site that we're going to assess. So it's basically this site.
Oh,
here.
looks like yeah.
So it's just it's a workshop. It's a garage. So this is going to be our site. So first thing to do, obviously we've got the online map. So I'm gonna have a look at the risk on the online maps. So we've got the postcode OX281BY. So we can go on the long-term flood risk map, and we can also go on the flood map for planning and just see what they show for this location. So we just go on here, and obviously we can search the postcode OX281BY. And then obviously it gives you an option. So I'm going to select Halfords off the property list. And it's coming up showing it's medium risk of rivers and medium risk of surface water flooding. You can have a look at the map. It's picked up the same location there. So this is the surface water map. And we've also got the fluvial flood risk map. So that's great. And again, we can just check what flood zone it's in. Cookies. So OX281BY. And we can look and see what, I'm expecting it to be flood zone 3, but I'll just move you can move the little icon to where we are and see what it comes up with. I'm expecting flood zone 3, might be flood zone 2. So it's a mix of flood zone 3 and 2, basically. So yeah, we've got a good understanding of what the data should be showing once we put it into GIS. So in terms of the base maps, before we get to the flood risk maps, we want to prepare some kind of site location plans. So we need a kind of good overview of what the sites, you know, what's actually at the site. So rather than use OpenStreetMap, we preferably want to use the OS data, because the OS data tends to be better mapping than OpenStreetMap. You know, we could use the OpenStreetMap, but we'll use the OS data. So what you want to do is you want to identify what OS tile, so Ordnance Survey tile, this is. So we can go into Street Map, and we can search the site location again, which was, let's check it, OX281BY. OX281BY. So we can go in here. It's the arrow's not quite in the right location, so I'll just point it exactly where we need to be. And then we can convert coordinates at the bottom to give us details of the exact location. So what we're looking for here is the OS tile, which is based on the national grid. So we're looking at this third row here and trying to identify what OS tile we need to import into GIS. So the tiles we're looking for is the SP tile, and then there's a 6-digit or I think it's a 12-digit number here, might be a 10-digit number, which gives us an indication of what tile we require. So we can go and download this data from the OS website. So if you just search Ordnance Survey data, or go on the Ordnance Survey website, you can go on products, and then there's various different products you can download. So what we want is we want the open data. So if you click on free, and then we want to go down and select, this is typically the best map layer. You see there's various different layers, free downloads, they're all slightly different in format. I find that the vector map tends to be the best one. So we can click on vector map. And then if you scroll back up the page, there's a free download here. So we're on the vector map district and free download. Again, the base mapping is not critical. It just helps for consistency. You know, clients will have OS maps available to them, so it'll look familiar. So when you click free download, it'll bring you through to this page. It's best to typically only download the tile that's relevant to your site. So it's best to set a custom area. So you'll see when this opens up now, we've got the UK split into tiles. So what we want here is we want the SP tile. You know, we've looked on Street Map and it said that it's the SP tile. So I can select SP, and you'll see it selected it. I can save that selection. And then the format we want, there's different formats here. There's shape files, and then GeoTIFF, which are kind of image files. So the best file I tend to prefer when doing these maps is the GeoTIFF backdrop. So we selected the SP tile, we selected GeoTIFF backdrop, and then I'm going to download the data. So I'm going to download the data and I'm going to save it into our GIS tutorial folder. So I'm just going to save it in here and it'll download. So that's going to take, so it's going to take a minute to download. It might take a bit longer. The other thing we need to then start thinking about is what data we're going to add in. So before we get onto the flood risk data, the third kind of third layout we usually prepare is the lidar data. So we're looking at topographic levels. You know, most sites we don't have detailed topographic survey, so we want an understanding of the lidar levels. So we can get that data through the Environment Agency Open Data portal. So again, I'm just going to search in here to get this data. So again, we've opened up in the UK. You can search for the location here. So we know where our site is, so we just put the postcode in, OX281BY. That takes us where we want to go, and you can see we've got the lidar data already here. So if you go on the layers list, we go on just turn the lidar elevation on, and then it's possible to download this data by just move over here. If you click on show item details, so you click the ... next to the layer, and you click Show Item Details, it'll open a new tab where it'll allow you to download the data. So it opens a new page, an ArcGIS web page. And if you scroll down here, there's an option, there's a link here to download the survey data. So if you want to download the survey data, and again, it'll open another web page now where you can select exactly where you want to download the data. Just give it a second to load. And again, we don't want to download a data set for the whole UK because the file's going to be massive. So we just want to download data that's relevant to our specific location. So I'm going to zoom in on Whitney here. And I want to download data for our site, which is here, but we might want to get an understanding of ground levels elsewhere. So there's a little tool here which pops up on the right hand side where you can select your area. If you click the left one of these tools, it lets you draw a shape basically. So I'm deliberately going to draw over the line here, the grid square. And if you just click, and then double click, just a random square that covers our site. I know my site's in here. And then we want to get the available data. So we click the Get Available Tiles icon. And this will load up, should load up. You'll see there's two tiles here. There's the SP31 Southeast tile and the SP30 Northeast tile. So just going to wait for this to do something. So yeah, now it pops up and it gives you an option. So we want the DTM data, that's the terrain model data, rather than the surface model data. You'll see in here there's various different ones. We want the composite DTM, and we want the most recent year available. We also want the highest resolution available. So you'll see there's the DTM, you'll see there's the year. We want to get the 1 meter resolution really. So you'll see these two ones pop up here at the bottom. So if we just click on these, it'll allow us to download them. So again, I'm just going to save them into my project folder here, the Northeast tile and also the Southeast tile. As you see, it's downloading those tiles now. So we can go into our location where we save these now. Just bring this across. So we've got some zip files now where it's downloaded this data. So we want to unzip our OS data. So just extract it and it downloads as a zip file. It might take a minute. And we also want to extract our lidar data. I'll just let it do that for a minute. So to bring in the relevant tiles, we need to obviously know where our site is. So going back on Street Map, we've identified that the tile here is SP357102. So when it's a 6-digit, we're looking at the front end of the first and the fourth digit basically. So we say 357102, kind of it's almost split into kind of an easting and a northing in terms of a grid reference. So the tile here we want is SP31. So we can go back into GIS, and you'll see there's a browser bar on the left here, which is quite useful for bringing in data. So we can go into our folder, GIS tutorial, and you see these folders which you've just extracted are here. So I can go into the SP folder and just go down through the tiles, and you see we've now got this data. So the OS vector map district data for the SP area, and you'll see there's lots of tiles because it's covering a massive area, but we only want the tile which is relevant to our site, which is SP31. So if you go down, find tile SP31, if you hold down, click it and drag it into your workspace, what you'll get is you'll get a box like this pop up. You don't need to worry about this. It should automatically recognize what grid reference you're using. So if you click OK, it should pop up, and you'll see there you go. You've got the OS data. So we can zoom out here, and we've got the OS tile. Obviously, there's one missing below here. So that's tile SP30, I think. So again, we could drag that in and SP30 appears. And as I say, you zoom out and actually, those are just 2 grid tiles. We could bring in loads more and have a whole area, but we only really need the tiles that are specific to our site. So that's fine. We can, we don't need to show all the layers, so I'll just turn it off. So it's better to use the OS data really than the OpenStreetMap. The OpenStreetMap's great for locating your site initially, but where possible, use the OS. Oops, I took out the wrong tile there. SP31. Yeah, where possible, use the OS data. One thing to note as well is with the open source data sets is they'll always be continually updating. OS, the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales are constantly updating their data sets. So don't assume if you download data for an area 6 months ago that the data is still the most recent and relevant mapping available. So always go back and check or delete the previous data you've had and download the new data just to make sure you've definitely got the latest version. So yeah, so we brought in that, and then we can also bring in the lidar. So again, these are the folders which we've extracted from our download, and you'll see there's a TIFF file here, SP31 Southeast, and again you can bring that in, and you'll see it doesn't really show us much. It's kind of put a big black square on, but we can edit this in a second. So I'll come back to that in a second. So I think the next thing we want to do really is to add our site. So I'm going to go back to where that is, if I can find it. So our site's down here. So in terms of understanding our assessment, understanding kind of where things are, the extent, what areas are going to be affected, we want to be able to clearly show our site. So that involves adding a site boundary. So to do this in GIS, we can add a layer showing that. So if we click the layer tab here, and we can create a new shapefile layer. So layer, create layer, new shapefile layer. And when you're in here, you just want to click the browse to where your project folder is. So we're going into GIS tutorial, and I'm just going to call this, I would just call it site location. So, if it's located within your specific project file, site location is fine. So I'll just call it site location. Make sure it's an Esri shapefile. Save. So this is where it's going to save it. It's going to save it in this folder. It's going to call the file site location. And what we want to call the file is we want to call it a geometry type of the file. We want to call it a polygon. So we draw a shape basically. And then these are the coordinate systems. So standard coordinate systems, these are the main standard ones. If you just select British National Grid, EPSG 27700 or OSGB36, that should be fine. So this is going to create a new shapefile called site location. We're going to be able to draw a polygon, and it's going to be using this coordinate system. So if we click OK, you'll see it's created this new shapefile, but we haven't associated any data with this yet. So what we can do is we can edit this and create a site boundary in QGIS. So there's a tool here, there's a pencil tool. So we make sure we've selected the layer we want to edit. You see it won't let us edit some layers we've downloaded, but this layer we've created we can edit. So if I click the pencil tool, you'll see a couple of other icons are lit up. You'll see this one here allows us to add a polygon feature. And there's also a vertex tool which allows us to edit the polygon feature. So if you click add polygon, you'll see in the workspace now I've got a little crosshair which allows me to draw. So by clicking at any point on the map, I can now start drawing a site boundary. So I'm just going to draw a rough shape here. You can zoom in and out. While you're doing this, my mouse did that automatically just then, which is why it zoomed out. And then when you get to your final point, if you right click, this little box will pop up. We don't really need to give it an attribute. You could give it an ID if you want, but if you just click OK, and then we've got our boundary. We're calling this our site. So what we want to do is we want to go back up to this toolbar here. We want to save that, and then we want to turn off editing. If you're not quite happy with your shape, you can click on the vertex tool, and this allows you to select the corners and move them around a bit. If you haven't quite picked the right corner of the property, or you want to add a new corner in, you can do that. So as you can see, and then you can add a corner in and move it a little bit. So it gives you an option to edit it if need be. So you can save that and turn it off. So we've got our shape now. And that's so obviously the shape we've got at the moment is automatically filled in with purple, which isn't very helpful for us because we can't see our site beneath it. So we need to edit the attributes of the site location. So we can double click on the site location. And then we've got a layer properties tool, which we can edit. So here we want to go on symbology because this is how it's being represented in the GIS plan. So what we want to do here is we want to get rid of the fill color. So transparent fill, we don't want any fill color. So we want it to, be a hollow shape that we can see the site beneath. And then in terms of the line, we just want to edit that. Usually red's best, so I'd typically go with red. And then we want to make it a thick line so it's clear. So maybe we'll go with, just edit the number so it's quite a large number. So we've got a nice thick red line. So solid red line, transparent fill, and just increase the thickness of the line so we can see it clearly. And you'll see now that we've got a nice thick red line showing our site boundary, which is great. This is useful now because we can then show the lidar data. Now it's best to add the site boundary first to get an understanding of how we edit the lidar data to show what we want it to show for the site. So I'm going to turn on the layer here. So I'm showing our site boundary over the lidar layer, so we can't really see. It's masking everything beneath. Another useful tip to do is you can drag the layers and reorder them here. So the layer that appears at the top of the list is the one that's in front. So if I put site location below, it disappears because the lidar layers above it. So try and keep the site location layer at the top, so we can see everything behind it, and we can see that relative to all the other data. So this is where we need to edit the properties of the lidar layer so it's a bit clearer in terms of the ground levels. So this layer, the lidar layer, has got some attributes associated with obviously the ground level data. So we want to interrogate that a little bit. And there's an information tool here on the top bar where it allows us to identify features. So if we click on this tool, we can click random points, and you'll see what's happened here is there's a window that's opened on the right hand side, which allows us. I'm just clicking various points and it's showing us the ground level from the lidar data. So it's looking at the data in this location. You'll see if you click where there's two bits of data, it gives you an option to pick which. So I'll just select the within the site. So we can see that the ground levels within the site are about, just clicking various points, 81.5, 81.36, 81.69, 81.6. So we know kind of lowest levels in the sites are around 81, just above 81 meters AOD. But to show the relative ground levels around the site as well, we need an understanding of what the ground levels are around the site. So we can click random spots. So if we go a bit further downstream, you'll see that the ground levels are lower. So we've got 80.2, 80.8, and then if we go over here, the ground levels are a lot higher, 88, 90 even. So we want to be able to show that variation in ground levels both within and beyond the site. So we can then edit this layer. So if we double click, and we've got the layer properties again. And again, we want to be in the symbology layer. And you'll see the default setting it's given this layer is called single band gray. We don't want to use that. We want to use single band pseudo color. So we've actually got some color associated with it. So when you change that from single band gray, which is the default, to single band pseudo color, it gives you an option to add a color ramp. So the color ramp we tend to use for ground levels is kind of a green to a red, or blue to a red in this instance. I think there's various color ramps here. You can change the color. We'll use red, yellow, green. And what we want is you want the red to, typically I tend to have the red as the highest. So again, you can go in here and you can invert the color ramp. So the red is the highest value and the green's the lowest value. What we've also got here is we've got the data showing, it's picking the smallest value within the whole data set of the lidar tile that we've got and the highest value. But that's, if I apply this now, it's not going to be very useful to the site. So you'll see that I've applied that and it's showing the whole site to be green. The the high ground levels are really far north of the site. And our plan that we're going to produce is probably only going to include the site and a couple of kilometers around it. So actually showing the data like that's not very useful to us. So we want to edit the range of data values. So we know that the smallest value within the vicinity of the site is about 80. So I'm going to pick I might pick 75. And then we also picked up a value which was close to the site, which is about 90. So we can set the minimum and maximum value, and anything beneath or above those values will appear just in the solid color at either end of the range. So within here, we also want to kind of edit the legend a bit. So first of all, always change it to equal interval, and then we can change it so it's the color delineation is split into discrete categories. So here it's split into, what is this, 0.875, which isn't very easy to read. So maybe we want to try and get it down to every I don't know, couple of meters or so, or 0.5. We could have every 1.5 meters. That's not too bad. So the categories are every 1.5 meter ground level, and split it up. That's a bit easier to read. Also change the label precision. Either change it to 0 decimal places or just an arbitrary 1 or 2, because the precision, we're not down to 4 decimal places. So you'll see that we've added some extra classes so we've got even intervals between the values. We've made sure it's on equal interval. We've changed the color ramp to show green to red, and we've changed the label precision. We set a minimum value and a maximum value based on the ground levels at and within the vicinity of the site, so that the plan will show us useful ground levels for our site rather than ground levels for areas which are far away. So when I click apply now, you'll see that there's there's areas here of fully red. So these areas are all above 90 meters, whereas our site's green, so it's kind of lower levels. One thing just to note, actually, one thing to go in here is when you're in legend settings, is always set it to untick this box, use continuous legend, because we want the data to show as we've shown it here. So if I just click apply here, you'll see that it shows it as individual values, which is more helpful. We can also add some transparency to the layer so we can see the layer beneath. So again, going into the layer properties here, there's a layer called transparency. So at the moment, it's very opaque. We can't really figure out what the ground level relates to, the lidar data relates to around the site. So we can increase the transparency. So I don't know, just take it down to 70% or something like that. And what we can now see is that the lidar data is overlaid on the map below. So we've got the Google satellite below, and we can see that lidar data. Alternatively, put it, it's a lot, tends to be a bit clearer on the OS data than the satellite image, because the satellite image is a bit more color and shadows and areas of light and dark. So again, you might look at this and think, actually, it's not showing a huge variation of ground levels at the site. Maybe that's not enough. That's what I'm thinking looking at this. So maybe we go back in and edit a bit. Maybe we bring that down to 75 to 85. And you see we've got discrete classes, and I click apply, and then you'll see again this has varied it. You see there's not much green appearing, so maybe our lower value's too low. So maybe let's go back in again. Let's change this to 78 and amend the number of values just so we've got even intervals. That's looking a little bit better. They can see the variation between the green and the slightly higher areas. If I turn that layer off, you can see obviously the lower areas following the water course and the red area. So that's looking okay. I think that'll do here. So we've got our base data. We've got our OS data. We've got our satellite data. We've got our lidar data. Now we want to start adding some flood risk data. So at the moment we're just throwing all the data in the plan, so everything's there for us to see. So there are various data sets we can add, and it's best to download a load of these at once. So you can go into, just search on Google. So just search EA main river dataset. Basically, what we want to do is you want to be able to show the data as it appears on, say, the flood map for planning here. So we want to download all these data sets. We want the main river data set. We want the flood zone 2 data set. We want the flood zone 3 data set. We want the flood defence data set, we want the areas benefiting from flood defences data set, and we want the water storage area data set. And all these data sets are available freely under the Open Government Licence in England. So when you search EA main river data set for English sites, you'll see that there's this option, data.gov.uk website, statutory main river map. So we can click on here, and this website, the data.gov.uk website, allows you to download the data. You'll see that this data has been updated on the 12th of August. As I mentioned with the mapping data, the EA will update these data sets quite regularly. So it's best to review the ones that you've downloaded and download them every couple of months and just check that you've got the latest data in case anything's changed, particularly with regard to the flood map extents. So as you scroll down here, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to download the data set. So there's various different files here. What we want is the download. Again, it opens this portal. What tends to be best here is it's best to build a library of these data sets because you're going to be using these data sets on every site, regardless of where we are in England. So in this instance, rather than select the specific area, you can select the specific area and download it to the project if you wish, but I find it best to create a data library. And I'll show you my data library in a second. So you download the full data set. And if you click, the shapefile layer is the one we want here. You click shapefile and it'll download the full shapefile. So I'll just show you my data library here. So ideally what you want to be able to do here is create a library of the full data set. So these data sets, so obviously I'm downloading the main rivers one here, but as I mentioned, we want the flood zone 2 data set, the flood zone 3, flood storage areas benefiting from defences, and the spatial defence data sets. And there's also some other ones which we'll come on to as we're working through. So all these ones are available to download on the data.gov.uk website. So make sure to search them and download the full data set. And once you've got a whole library of those, it's then very simple to bring those into QGIS. So what all I have to do is I have to navigate to that location. So I've created this data library. It's a GIS data library. These are the EA data sets which are covering England. And I want to show the main rivers. I know there's a river next to the site here, and I want to show it. So I can go to the main river data, and if I go through the folder system, there's this shapefile here, .shp file, a shapefile, which is what a GIS file we can bring into QGIS. If I grab that file and drag it in, you'll see that a faint line's appeared. This is the main river layer. So first of all, I'm just gonna rename it. So I've brought it into this plan. I'm just gonna rename it because I don't want it to appear as main river map. I'm gonna just call it main river. So you can right click and rename it. It's also not very clear. It doesn't really look like a river, being a little pink line. So again, you can go in and edit the attributes. So I'll just double click on it, go in symbology. A river, as it's shown on the flood map for planning, is a dark blue line. So I'm just going to select dark blue, and I'm going to increase the thickness because it's not very thick on the default setting. I'll click apply, and then we've got a nice thick blue line. The thing to note, obviously, this data set's only showing the main rivers. The Ordnance Survey also supply a map via their website which shows watercourses. So they've got a rivers layer. Again, I can go back on their website. Got it. So if we just go on Ordnance Survey, if we just go back on this website we've got, so the products website. Obviously, if our site's not next to a main river, but we want to show that there's a river there, it might be best to use the watercourse layer. So there's this data set called OS Open Rivers. And again, we can free download, and download for our site or the whole of the UK. In this instance, we want to download the shapefile. And you can download. So I'll show you how that appears in GIS. So again, I've got this set up within my GIS database where I've got rivers data set, which is that one which is available, and there's two here. There's hydro node and watercourse. So the watercourse layer is the water, showing the rivers, which includes minor rivers. So you'll see you might just be able to see that it's brought in a new layer here, which doesn't quite follow the same alignment as shown on the EA map. But what you will be able to see, hopefully, if I just zoom out to a different location, I think up here shows it well, is that actually it shows rivers that aren't designated as main rivers. So that can be useful for sites where it's an ordinary watercourse or a minor watercourse. Again, it doesn't show every single watercourse, but it shows more minor ones. So again, we can just edit this. Edit this layer. We don't typically need to show both. Firstly, because there's a bit of a conflict between the alignment of watercourses and rivers. And also, hopefully only one of them is relevant next to our site. There might be a mix. So you'll see the watercourse. You see it's not quite exactly the same alignment. They've been drawn slightly differently. But for example, if our site was up here and we were showing plans in this area here, the main rivers layer isn't much use. It's not actually showing us anything. We need the watercourse layer to show us where the watercourse close to the site is located. So that's fine. So I'm just going to zoom back on our site. I'll just turn it off. So that one's not relevant in this instance. So you can remove the layer. So I've obviously dragged it in here, but you can also remove layers. So if you right click on the layer, click remove layer, and that will disappear. And then in terms of the other data sets, we want to be able to replicate the flood map for planning. So we want to be able to bring in flood zone 2. So again, I've downloaded the full flood zone 2 data set and I've brought that in. And also flood zone 3. So again, we want flood zone 3 to be above flood zone 2 because flood zone 2 is only going to mask it otherwise. And we want to edit the layer. So we want to set up a consistent way of representing the data. So we want to try and represent it how it's shown on the EA zone flood map online. So it's kind of a light blue for flood zone 2 and a dark blue for flood zone 3. So again, we can just go in the layer attributes. I'll find a light blue layer, roughly light blue. We can make that okay. And then we can add a bit of transparency as well. So we've got this layer here, opacity. We want to be able to see through beneath and see the site beneath. So I can add opacity beneath it. So I'll maybe just set it at about 50%. I want to do the same with flood zone 3. So obviously I want to set this to a darker blue. It's a kind of a darker blue layer for flood zone 3. And again, I want to set a bit of opacity so I can see through it. So again, I'm going to set that to 50% as well. And there we go. So you'll see what's happened here is we've got those layers have come in above the site location. So I can drag the site location back to the top. So the site location shown above. I'll just turn off the lidar layer. And you'll see now we've got a very relatively decent replica of the flood map for planning online. So you'll see we've got the main river there and we've got the flood zone 2 and flood zone 3 extents based on that model data. One thing to get rid of maybe here is you'll see that the flood zone 2 data has been kind of stitched together based on various outlines, which looks a bit odd and it might get queried by someone. So you can remove those outlines here. If you go into the simple fill, we can just get rid of the outline. So just turn it into a transparent outline and you'll see we've then got a nice smooth, it's got rid of those lines within the layer. So I'm going to rename these just so it'll appear nice on our plans when we've done it. So we're just going to call it flood zone 2. And we're just going to call this one flood zone 3. Zone 3. And if it was relevant, it's not relevant on this site, but if it was relevant, we'd want to bring in the flood defense layer. Obviously, it's not showing there's any flood defenses here. And we'd also want to bring in the areas benefiting the defenses layer where there are flood defenses. So I'll just zoom out on here. There might be somewhere downstream when that might be relevant. Get down into Oxford maybe. Cool that I found somewhere where there's no flood defenses. Here we go. So yeah, we're down in Slough now. So we'll just click on this one. So you'll see if you had a site in here, you'd obviously want to show the defences, and you'd want to show that this area, even though it's shown to be flood zone 3, is an area that benefits from flood defences. So we can add those layers in to show that. So yeah, just as an example, we'll go back up to our site. The other data we want to add is we want to be able to show, so in terms of plans, we want to show the site location, we want to show the lidar data, we want to replicate the flood map for planning. So those tend to take up the first 3 or 4 of our plans that we prepare. So a site location plan using the Google satellite data, a site location plan using the OS data, a lidar plan with the OS data underneath, and then the flood map for planning. The next data we want to show is we typically want to have a look at kind of recorded or kind of historic flood extents. So again, we can check this data on here. We know, as part of our general survey reports, we look for this data. So we can add data here and we can look for historic flood extents. So historic flood. I'll just search for that data. We can just get an awareness as whether it might have been affected. So in this instance, there is our site here within here is being shown within a historic flood extent. So again, you can search for this data. This data is available. So we can go for EA recorded flood outlines or historic flood extents. And here we go under data.gov.uk. This was updated in September 2022. This is one of the data sets which will be regularly updated because it's obviously updated every time there's a flood. And again, down here, there's a download option. So download this data set, make sure you add it to your GIS library. And then we can add that data into our GIS, QGIS plan. I'm just going to save this. Make sure to regularly save it because if you bring data in and it crashes, sometimes it does crash. It's open source software, so it's not perfect. So I'm going to bring in the recorded outlines. So recorded flood outlines here. This is the data set that's been downloaded. And again, I can drag this in. And there we go. It's come up with a load of layers showing kind of recorded flood extents. And what we want to do is we want to be able to show this so it looks reasonably tidy. We can see our site beneath it. So, you could select a pre-designated one here, just a hatch or something similar. So I'll just select that hatch. Turn off the flood zone layers, and we can see the hatch. You'll see in this one there's specific outlines which are showing individual recorded events. So there are 2 data sets. There's the historic flood map, which is a merged data set, and there's the recorded flood outline. So in this instance, it might be better to use the historic flood map. I'll bring this in to show you what I mean. So you'll see here, if I just put this layer on top, you'll see there's 2 layers here. I've got the historic flood map and the recorded flood outlines data set. So as I said, the recorded flood outlines is looking at the outlines for individual specific events, whereas the historic flood map kind of merges all those layers into one. So you'll see that the total extent matches the two fit together basically. But in terms of what's useful for show, what's best to show on the GIS plan, what's clearer, again, there'll be some confusion if someone looks at our site and sees that there's all these different lines. That looks a bit confusing. So maybe it's best to just show the historic flood map. So we can, a useful tool as well is copying the styles. So this is, I'll just show you how to do this. So we've obviously set a style for recorded flood outlines, but we've decided we don't want to use that layer. So you can copy the style that you've set for that layer. If you go right click on the layer, if you go styles, copy style, and then click all style categories, and then right click on the layer you want to apply that style. Again, click on style, click on paste style, and all style categories. What happens then is it's copied the style that you've assigned to one layer to the other layer. So you don't need to redo it basically. This is really useful if you set up one GIS plan and you've got a really nice plan and you've formatted all your layers so they look really nice and tidy. When it comes around to do your next plan, you can then copy the styles across. It is possible to go in and assign permanent attributes to your layers and save it to your specific layers. But copying the styles across is equally as quick if you've got a couple of screens and able to just copy them across. So now we've got a historic flood map. So that's our 5th plan. We've got our site location plans, we've got our lidar plan, which we'll do. We've got our flood map for planning, and we've got historic flood extents. Now what we want to do is you want to look at any data that's been sent. So for some sites, we won't be given any, we won't have obtained any detailed hydraulic data, flood model data from the Environment Agency, which is fine. So there's nothing more for us to show. In this instance, we do have some data available. The Environment Agency sent us some model data for the watercourse that flows through Whitney. And therefore we want to try and present those results because that data is more detailed than the flood map for planning. It might show more scenarios than the flood map for planning. So I'm just going to go find the email that we were sent originally. So at the beginning of this the project that we had in Whitney, we sent a request off to the Environment Agency and they sent us some data. Just going to open this email and show you. So this is the email we got back for 14 Bridge Street, which is a different site in Whitney. In this instance, they didn't give us a product 4, which is fine because we're creating some GIS plans, but they did send us the product 6 data. So the product 6 data is the output data basically from here, the river Windrush is the river which runs next to the site. And they sent us a share file, which is this model basically. This hydraulic model covers the reach of the river next to the site. So it's the Windrush model, Warsham to the A40 from 2014. And they've sent a share file which we could download. So download that data, save it. Again, it's best to sometimes create a database of this information rather than assign it to a specific project. So in my instance, I've got a separate folder called EA, and these abbreviations are for the different EA regions. So I know this one was sent from the THM region, and here's where I've saved the model. So there's different models for other sites, but the Windrush model, Warsham to A40, 2014, I've saved all the model files here. So this folder here, and you'll see the different data sets. So there's the product 5, which is the model report, product 6, which is the model outputs, and the product 7, which is the model inputs. In terms of showing data, we want the model outputs really. So sometimes there might be some data included with the model report itself, but most of the information we'll want is here in the product 6. So ideally you want to look at the 2D results. So the 1D results is looking at the individual cross sections within the channel that will have been developed as part of the model, and looking at the relative peak level within the channel. The 2D results will be looking at the extent of flooding either side of the channel, looking at the ground, ground profile, topography, and assessing how far flooding will affect neighbouring areas. And in some instances, we also get these height and depth grids. So if they've done a more in-depth analysis, they might have reviewed what the likely flood depths will be within the areas which are shown to flood. So for this example, we've got, I'll just click and open the 2D results. It's sometimes best to have a read through the model reports to see what runs they've done. They might have done some sensitivity analysis as part of the data that they've given us. Sensitivity analysis could include blockage scenarios at certain locations. It could include sensitivity analysis, kind of assuming different characteristics of the watercourse of the river channel. And then also might have done climate change runs for sensitivity, including for increased flows due to climate change. So I am just waiting for this to open up. It opens up. So I'm just going GIS outputs. So I'm just going in the climate change rerun. So they obviously rerun the model. The original model was from 2014. They've got some additional outputs from 2017, but they've obviously rerun the model. And then I've got a flood extents. And there's 4 scenarios here. So you'll learn to understand. Hopefully, sometimes they'll give you a spreadsheet as part of the outputs or the data they provide, but there tends to be a relatively consistent way of how they refer to different modelled extents, depending on what scenario they've modelled. So here we've got 4 flood extents for the climate change scenario. We've got the 1 in 100 year and a 15% climate change uplift on river flows. 1 in 100 year, 25%. 1 in 100 year, 35%. 1 in 100 year, 70%. So I can select all of these layers, just Control Shift, and I can drag them all into my workspace. You'll see here that there's a question mark appeared here because the data hasn't been referenced to the same coordinates reference we're using in our GIS workspace. So we can change that. So we can double click on here. If you double click on the little question mark and then set it to a default layer, so default coordinate system, which it should have been saved to. So as I said at the beginning, one of the most common ones is EPSG 27700 or OSGB 36. You can search that here. I've got this one saved as a recently used system. So if I click OK, that data then appears. And you want to do that for every layer. So if I just select that for every layer, you can double click on the question mark and assign that coordinate system to the layer. And here we've got the different layers. We've got 15, 25, 35, 70. So we're expecting the 70% extent to be the greatest. And that matches what we can see here. You know, the 70% model outline is greater than the 35, which is greater than the 25, which is greater than the 15. So that makes sense. And we can see that the site's affected in different scenarios. We can see actually the fringes of the site here in these different scenarios. Only the kind of northwestern corner, northeastern fringe, and the eastern corner are affected in the 100-year 15%. But if the uplift is 25% or 35%, the whole site is basically affected. So we can make those assessments as part of our report and those conclusions. So it's useful to see that with our site boundary there. So I'm just gonna delete those. Well, not delete. I'm just gonna untick those layers. What I wanted to do was show the layers here for me. See if that puts in here. So again, just gonna have a dig around in here just to see the data I want is there, whether it's just not opening or not. Okay, so it's not in that folder. So they don't seem to have given us the outlines for the other events. So obviously for the flood map for planning, the one in 100 year is the flood zone 3 extent, and the one in 1,000 years the flood zone 2 extent. We don't seem to have those outputs here, not as in terms of a flood extent, but they might have given us some other data. So what we can do here is that they'll have typically modeled more scenarios than just the one in 100 year and the one in 1,000 year, which is used on the flood map for planning. So we might want to show the risk to the site in lower scenarios. So they might have modeled a 1 in 2 year, a 1 in 5 year, a 1 in 10 year, 20 year, 25, 30, 50, 1 in 75 year. They might have modeled all those scenarios. They might have modeled the 1 in 200 year as well. And we can show those flood extents on the plan. So we can bring in that data where it's being provided. And we can create plans showing the flood risk extent data. Again, we might want to rename this. So if you just call it 1 in 100 year plus 25% CC, just so that makes it a bit more obvious for us. Sorry, it's 15%. 15% CC. And we can do the same for the other layers. I'm not going to go through it now, just for time's sake. But they've also provided some other data here. So we've got water level grids. We've also got depth grids, which could be useful to bring in. So you'll see there's some files here called ASC files, ASCII files. And for each scenario, for the 1 in 100 year, climate change 15%, climate change 25%, 35%, and 70%, there's an .asc file. Ignore the .ovr, the .asc file. So we can bring in these depth grids. So they're modeling the potential flood depths within the flood extents. So we can bring that in. And again, you'll see that it's not really liked, that data. I'm just going to reorder this. It's best to try and keep this tidy so you know where your data is. And I can rename these layers again. So I'm just going to rename the one brought in. I'll just call it 1 in 100 year plus 15% CC flood depth. You might want to call this one flood extent. Again, so it's not like that data. So we'll have to assign the right coordinate system, and we can bring that in. And again, I'll just do it the same for all these other layers, so it's there. And there we go. So that data's come in. Again, similar to what we had with the lidar data, it's kind of showing it as it's kind of brought it in as a default black and white, which isn't very useful to us. So what we want to do is we want to edit the layer. So we can double click the layer. We can go in here. Again, we probably want to change it to pseudo color, single band pseudo color. And we can see that it's identified the minimum and maximum flood depths within the data. So that's 0 and 1.36. So maybe we'll round that up. Because that value is not really of any use. You look at that big long number and it doesn't really tell us anything. So maybe we'll just round up to 1.5. And then again, we want to set some discrete values. So we want to set it to equal interval. And maybe just have some sensible values. So we'll split it into 0.25s. Again, we can change the number of classes. So we've got it going up in 0.25 intervals. And here we don't really want this palette. A red to green palette doesn't really give us an indication of depth. So maybe blue would be better, where light blue is shallow and dark blue is deep. When you click apply, and then it appears. So this is a very good visual tool in terms of understanding flood depths. So we can then zoom in on our site, and we can see the darker areas in the site where there are greater flood depths, and we can even interrogate their data. You see, I've still got the information tool. I can click on that point there, and it's offering me to select the 15% flood depth, and it tells me the model flood depth at that very location, so 0.58 in this instance. I can click a different part of the site again, and the depths there are much shallower, only 0.986. So I can click this very deep area over here, and it's showing me the flood depths of almost 1.4 meters. So as part of our analysis, we can use this. You know, the data's there for us to assess specific potential peak flood depths around the whole site, both within and adjacent to it. So it's a really useful tool. And again, we can copy the style. So we set that style here. We might want to check actually, because the peak flood depth for the highest bond scenario might be greater. So I'm double clicking here. You'll see actually the peak flood depth here is 1.6, and we set the maximum within our previous one here is 1.5. So I can copy the style into the next layer, paste the style. So you'll see it showing that exactly the same, but actually what we've done is we've lowered the maximum flood depth. So it might be worth increasing this to 1.8 or similar, or just a value above the peak depth. And again, just edit the values to show kind of a nice even interval. 3.5, that'll do. That'll do, just 0.3 intervals. And again with this, similar to the lidar data, in the legend settings, make sure to untick continuous legends. So we've got discrete values here. Again, I'm just going to go back in there and just reduce. We don't need that many decimal places either. The default's too many. So we can show in the legend the discrete values 0, 0.3, 0.6, and that should correspond when we click on here based on the color. You know, the darkest color is 1.5. You know, I expect flood depths around here to be up close to 1.8 or close to 1.6. So that matches with what we're expecting, which is great. So we want to try and show as much data as you can. You know, you might have to produce several plans showing different scenarios, which is fine. So we receive the data, just import the data, have a play around with it, see which data you think is going to be most useful. It might be that we get some data and it's actually showing areas really far upstream or really far downstream of the site that's not really relevant. So we probably don't want to show that on the plan because it's not going to provide anything useful to the client. So we've covered off fluvial flood risks there. You know, we might have tidal flood risk if we've got some tidal inundation mapping. In tidal scenarios, we might be provided with some breach model scenarios. So they might provide us a location where a defense is going to be breached in a specific, potentially going to be breached in a specific event, and showing which areas are inundated and the potential flood depths behind any area of inundation. So that might be something to show different breach scenarios and depths. Again, hopefully we receive depth grids from the EA, which allow us to show good detail for our specific site. In terms of the final few plans, so this is obviously assessing fluvial or tidal risk. We also want to look at surface water. So we know from going here that on the long-term flood risk map, that the site is also potentially at risk or adjacent to areas at risk of surface water flooding. And this data is available to download, but it's not available to download in exactly the same place as the other data. So you can, you know, search EA surface water depth. So you can download it from here. Risk of flooding from surface water depth data. Again, this data dates back from 2015. One good way of downloading just the data that's specific to your site, because this data set, this data is quite large, is to go through the Environment Agency data portal rather than here. You can download the whole data set from here if you wish, but it'll be quite a large file. Again, you can download and have it set up. Alternatively, you can download it through here as we did with the historic flood outlines. Well, the lidar data, sorry. So we can search for surface depth, and these layers, the same layers which are available to the Environment Agency, come up here. So we can add these as we do when we're doing a property survey report. We're assessing the risk, and that will add the data, should add the data here. Now we only need to go through one of the layers here. So you'll see that data's popped up. And in terms of downloading the data, do exactly the same as what we did with the lidar data. So we click on the ... just to the right of the layer we want to download, and go show item details. Again, this opens a new ArcGIS web page. If we scroll down here, we can see a couple of links. We want to download the data. So we want the link here which says find out more and download the dataset at environment.data.gov. Again, this then sends us to another portal. And to download the data, we have to go on this link here. So available downloaded datasets, risk of flooding from surface water survey download. We click here, and then we get into the same portal we had for the lidar data, which allows us to download data for a specific location. So we can zoom into our site again. Oxford. So yeah, if we go down to Whitney. Again, we just want the data really that's affecting the areas at and within the vicinity of the site. So we can draw a polygon. You see this, again, it's on the boundary between two tiles here. So you might want to select both tiles. So I've just drawn that, double click to finish, and then download data. Take a second. And you'll see this, it's showing us two tiles. You see that I've selected an area that straddles two different tiles. So we want to select both. So I'll select one, SP30, it should start downloading. Well, it's offering me to save it in that location, that's fine. So again, I'm just saving it into these ones that are site specific. I'm saving them into the project file. If they're the whole data set, it's best to set up a GIS database that you can continually bring that data into whatever project you're working on. So this is again just taking a couple of minutes to download. Should appear in here hopefully in a second. So we've got those two files which are now appeared. So again, I'm just going to extract the data. So we've got them, extract that. Sometimes it'll let you add the data from a zip file. I tend to find it's best to extract them because that's not always the case. And the SP31's appeared as well, so I'll just extract that one too. So what we want to be able to show is we're going to try and replicate the depth plans here. So for the flood risk from surface water, there's a high risk depth of flooding plan. There's a medium risk depth of flooding plan, and there's a low risk depth of flooding plan. So we want to replicate all of these on our own GIS plans. So again, it's just extracting this data. Once you've got one of these set up, as I say, you can copy the styles across. So initially, when you first do it and setting up the styles for your rivers, for your site location, for your flood zone 2 and 3 and your defences, that can take a little bit of time to make sure you've got, you know, aesthetically it looks good. But once you've got one of them set up, you can copy the stars across. You can open 2 GIS workspaces and copy them off from another workspace. As I say, there are ways of also assigning permanent attributes to the layer so that when you bring it into any GIS workspace, it'll already have a pre-assigned layer. So you can explore doing that as well if you wish. The other thing I'm going to do here with the Google satellite as well, which I find helps, is just to add a bit of transparency on it, just so it's not so bright. So if you just reduce it down to about 75, and it just kind of makes it sit in the background a bit more there, so it's not so bright. And obviously some of the greens and things stand out a bit too much, whereas actually we just want to focus on the site rather than areas close to it. So it's almost done this data, so I'll just go back into okay, so it's extracted this data, so I'm just going to turn off. So that's all our off-level data. I'm just going to turn all that off because we don't need to see that. So you'll see here we've got the risk of flooding from surface water data set. What we want to do here, if you're downloading something and it hasn't appeared, you can click the refresh and it should update based on your Windows Explorer. So you should see the SB31's now appeared. So I'm going to bring in the depth files. So there's 3 here. There's the 1 in 30, so the high risk, the 1 in 100 medium risk, and the 1 in 1,000 low risk. I want to bring in all 3, so I can select all 3 at once and drag them all in. And you'll see we've got the files here. So again, I'm just going to bring them above everything else, just so it's easy to work with. I'm also going to order them. So I can rename these. So I'm just going to rename this 1 in 30 year flood depth. Just meters. And what we want to do is we want to, it's showing as pink at the moment, which isn't very useful. And it's not very helpful to us. We want to be able to clearly show the different layers. So when we double click and go in properties here, we can go in categorized and we can select the depth layer. I'll just show you that again. So you go in symbology. Initially it was in single symbol, which doesn't, it's assigning the same attribute to every layer irrelevant of its depth. So if we go in categorized, and then within the layer there's different attributes. So we want to select the depth layer, and then we want to classify, and you'll see now that it's assigned different depths. We've got 0 to 0.15, 0.15 to 0.3, 0.3 to 0.6, 0.6 to 0.9, 0.9 to 1.2, and greater than 1.2. So what we want to do now is we want to show a graduation so it appears clearly on the map. So first of all, you'll see that the 0.0 to 0.15 is kind of sitting in the wrong, well, the 1.2 is sitting in the wrong place. It's sitting above all the other data. So we can drag that below. And there's also this layer, kind of all other attributes, which isn't really relevant. So we can get rid of that. In fact, you might be able to delete it. You can delete it here. So if I select that layer there, I can delete it and it's gone. So now we've just got the data that's relevant, so the depth data. And what we'll see is here that we've got, obviously we're starting at 0 and we're going up to 1.2. So again, we want to show a graduation really. So at the moment it's signing fixed layers, but actually what we want to do is we want to show a mix of depths. So again, we can assign a color ramp basically. Starting at shallow depth and finishing at a low, a deep depth. So light to dark basically, and as you see here, it's assign those, and we can apply that. What you'll see here actually is that the first color's quite light. I think that's okay. Let's just have a look. What you want to be able to clearly see the difference between the different depths. So you'll see this area says 0 to 0.15. Again, clicking on the information layer will give you information about that layer. That's 0.1 to 0.15 to 0.3. This should be 0.3 to 0.6. Yeah, and there's no greater data there, so that's fine. And the great thing is once you've set up this layer, again, you can copy the style, so you don't have to redo that for every layer. So you can copy the style, all style categories, go to the next layer, paste style, all style categories, and do that same for both layers. For these ones, they only map them up to greater than 1.2 meters anyway, so that's fine. you know, the depth isn't going to change. As you know, I picked out on the depth depth grid for the fluvial flood extents is the top of the range is slightly different. Here, it's consistent between the 3 data sets, so that's not an issue. And so if we turn on the 1,000-year extent, you'll see, you know, we've got depths of 0.9 to 1.2. There's nothing actually shown to be affecting the site, but we might want to mention that there's some flooding on the highway adjacent to the site of up to 0.3 meters. Or even in this small area, you know, the data's relatively low resolution. So whether we can trust it being this accurate, but it's saying there might be flooding greater than 0.3 meter depth. And obviously it's picking up the flood depths along the watercourse channel as well. So that's great. So we've got the surface water flood depth maps now as well. So in terms of our flood risk information, we've got a lot of data here. We've got the flood map, we've got the historic flood map, we've got the surface water maps. And that's all great information that we can show clearly to our client. You know, this information here, you know, we can zoom right in on our site here and see this information in a lot more detail. The EA will always caveat that this data isn't suitable for site-specific assessments, which is fine, but we can use the data to still make high-level judgments of what the likely risk is within a vicinity of a site, even if we can't make strong conclusions about the risk in very specific locations. So this is still useful, even if we, you know, it's not designed to be used on a site scale. And then the final map layer which we want to introduce, so is understanding flood warning areas and flood alert areas. Again, these data sets are available from the data.gov website, so we can just search EA flood warning. Data. And again, on the data.gov.uk website, flood warning area, you can go on here. There's one for flood alert areas as well. Again, this data is updated because they're constantly adding new areas or altering previous areas. So it's always good to make sure your data is up to date. And again, you can download the data here as a shapefile. So in my database, again, you'll have spotted it when we were in here. I've got the flood warning areas shapefile, full data set for the England. And I've got the flood alert areas full shapefile for England. And again, we kind of want to show it how it's shown by the EA, which are flood alert areas are typically shown orange, flood warning areas are typically shown in red. So we can bring that data in. Again, just navigate to where you have it saved. So flood alert areas, you want the data, you can drag that in. Pull that in a lovely shade of pink. And flood warning areas, and let's put it in purple. So, oops, sorry, you want the warning area on top of the alert area where possible. Again, I'll just bring this above these layers. Again, just rename them to get rid of the underscores. So you can just rename there. Warning area. Rename layer, flood alert area. Yeah, so you've got these 2 layers now, and again, you can just edit the attributes. Again, you might want to add some transparency. So flood alert area, I said orange, so just select an orangey color, and add some transparency to it, maybe. And flood warning area, you want to select a reddish color. Again, it doesn't have to be exact. Just select a chalky-ish color, and again, just add a bit of transparency, 60%. So what we can show here, we can turn these layers on and off. Ideally, you want to be able to see where the flood alert area extends more than the flood warning area. So in this instance, the flood warning area and the flood alert areas are the same. But you'll see if you come out of this area, you can see clearly now where there's a difference. You know, we've got the flood alert area here along this tributary, but the flood warning area is only covering the areas along the primary tributary. And there are some instances in here where the flood warning area is greater than the flood alert area, which shouldn't really be the case. That's obviously an error in the mapping. A flood warning area should always typically be covered by a flood alert area as well, but there's obviously some discrepancy there. So yeah, we can show that data there, and that's great. So we've got a lot of information showing in these maps, which is great. Make sure to save your workspace. So the next thing to do now we've got these plans is we want to prepare a set of GIS plans, basically PDF plans. So we can do that through the layout tool in QGIS. So if you click on project and click on layout manager, oops, this little box will pop up, and I'll make sure I've saved this template somewhere. Basically, we've created a template to allow us to create these plans. This is called the FPS A4 landscape template. So we want to create a set of plans. So create, and the first plan you want to create is probably just a site location plan. Site location plan. And then it pops up with this new layout tool. So this is the blank layout. So first of all, you want to set a few things up, maybe before you even add the data in. So you might want to add some information in. So there's some boxes here. You might want to just need to increase the size of the boxes. You can change the font size. You can change the size of the box. You can change the color if you want need be. So I'm just going to call this one site location plan. You want to give the project name, usually the site address. So, you know, in this instance, it's going to be Halfords Bridge Street, Whitney. And you want to add the client. You can be the client Ahmed in this instance. So the client is Ahmed. And again, just make sure you size the box. I tend to, you know, if you bring the box all the way across here, the word will then, the text will appear centrally. And again, you just want to add some information here. So you want to number your drawings. So first drawing you create will be drawing 1. Make sure you add a date in case you go back and revise the drawing. So there's a clear record of when the original drawing was created. And again, just add some initials, again, just for auditing purposes and making sure we've got a good record of who's done what when. So I've drawn it, and you know, Simon will probably approve it. So my initials are P and Simon's initials SC. So we've got a bit of information there, background. And then we might want to edit this information here. So that you'll see that it hasn't brought in the logo automatically. So the template's got some automatic attributes assigned to it here on the right hand side. Some of these layers are locked, so you're going to have to unlock some of these layers. So this layer here, which is the logo, we need to unlock this layer before we can edit it. So if you click, you see this column here is the locked layer. So if we untick that, we can then edit the picture layer, which is this image here. You'll see it hasn't brought anything in. So it depends what instruction we've got. Again, there are logos available on the shared drive. It's worth downloading these so you can bring them in. So there's a set of logos for flood protection solutions, flood, FPS environmental, and the FPS group. So whatever your project is, make sure you select the relevant logo, which matches the report template as well. If you go into the logo set, select the PNG file and select the color PNG, you can open that and it'll bring in the logo. So you can add the logo to our plan, and that looks a bit tidier. Obviously, if it's an FPS environmental instruction, make sure to also update the web address below. So again, you can update that just by unlocking the layer and editing the URL, the URL. So that's great. We've got the template set up. It's looking relatively tidy. So now we're going to add our data. So to do this, we can add a map. So there's a list of icons here on the left hand side. You'll see the 5th one down here is add map. So if you click on here, you've then got a crosshair which you can draw a map. So if you select the top left hand corner of this box and drag that down to the bottom right hand side, it will then add the map based on what's currently being shown on your GIS workspace. You'll see this is opened up in a new window. So if we go back into our workspace, it'll bring up what's currently being shown in that workspace, which is fine. What we need to do is we need to reorder a few things here because it's brought it in front of both the text, the box, the bounding box, and the north arrow and the copyright. So what we want to do is we can just, again, as we do in the layer list within the main workspace, is we can drag these on top of the map. So drag the copyright on top of the map and also drag the rectangle. You'll see when I drag the rectangle, it's opaque, which isn't very helpful. So you can change this if you just double click in style, double click in color, and then go down to opacity here and just change it to 0. So we want it to be 100% transparent so we can see right through the box. And there we go. So we've still got the nice, clear, crisp bounding box here. We changed the rectangle to 0%, and we've got the data within it. What we can then do is we can edit the data a little bit. So we want to be able to show the site clearly. So we want to use a sensible scale. So I've clicked, make sure you've got this, the third one, select or move item tool selected, and then you can select the map and you'll see that there's options to resize it. What you can do here over on the right hand side in the item properties on the map is there's an icon called interactively edit map extent. So when you click this, what you can do is you can drag your map around and make sure your site is central. You know, you want your site to be in the middle of the map. That's going to be clear. You can see everything around it then. You see the scale's not great. You know, we can't really see anything here, so we want to zoom in. So again, there's the option here to change the scale. So we want to zoom in. So I don't know, maybe 1 to 2000 might be better. And you'll see that we zoomed on the site, and actually we've got a clear picture of the site. That's about right. We can see a good area around the site, as well as this, you know, the constraints from the site itself. Again, the map's not quite central, so I'm just going to select the edit extent tool, and I'm just going to drag it so that the middle of the site sits roughly in the middle of the plan. And that's great. That looks tidy. We've got, you know, nice clear plan. The one thing to edit here is we then want to edit the scale. This, you know, the scale here is showing as 1:1, which isn't correct as to what we've just set it. So again, make sure you've selected the select and move tool. Select your scale box. In this instance, it's been locked, so make sure on the right hand side you want to untick the scale bar, select the scale bar, and then you can set it to match the scale that we've just set for the map. So you can select map 1 and just edit the size of the scale. So when you then edit the scale on here, that will automatically update because we've assigned it to the map. So you'll see that's updated. Go back to 2000. So that's tidy. Again, you can just lock that. And that's great. And that's looking pretty tidy. Final couple of things we want to do is first we want to add a legend. So again, just down here on the left-hand toolbar, we've got the option to add a legend. So we can do that here by drawing a box. And what you'll see here is it's brought in every single layer that's showing in our workspace, even though that information is not showing on the map, which isn't very helpful. So what we want to do is we can change a few things in here. Firstly, we'll give it a title, so we'll call it a legend. Some things to do is maybe just get rid of the background. So sometimes it overlaps things, which isn't very helpful. And then there's the options here to only show items linked inside a map. So in this instance, it's just the site location, the river, and the Google satellite, which is great. You know, when that information's there, that's perfect. And that's showing exactly what's there. The final thing we want to do is we need to add a copyright statement. So either below the map or below the legend, we need to add a copyright attribute statement for the data that we've used in the map. So we've got Google satellite data here. So we need to add an attribute statement to make sure we you know, included their copyright. We've also got Environment Agency data for the main river. A lot of the Environment Agency data will have been licensed under what's called the Open Government License. So you can put a very standard attribute statement for that. So in terms of the Google data, first of all, we can go and find that data online. So if we go back on our map online and go on the satellite layer, you'll notice in the bottom line here, there is a statement here. So it's imagery, copyright 2022. Again, you can't copy from here, which is a bit frustrating. So what you want to do is you want to go back into GIS here, and you want to write that out. So you want to write imagery, copyright. It's not going to work in here, so just give me a second. I'm just going to do this. You have to copy. You basically have to copy in the copyright symbol. So if you just type it somewhere and copy it, you can then bring it in. C22 2022. CNES Airbus get mapping, and then, you know, map data. So just put in the full, you know, I haven't put it all in there just for speed's sake, but make sure you put in the full attribute statement as it's shown here. So imagery, copyright 2022, CNE Airbus Get Mapping PLC, and important to note that this copyright is not the same for every location in the UK. It depends on where you are, depending on what satellite companies contributed to the map at this location. So don't assume it's the same as a previous site. Make sure to check on Google Maps Online and update the copyright accordingly. In terms of the EA data, we obviously want to make sure to add the correct attribution statement to that. So when you're downloading the data, there's an attribution statement here, which you can include at the bottom. So obviously for every data set you get, usually this will be pretty consistent for every Environment Agency data set. You can also just reference the Open Government License data. You'll see that on a lot of our plans, there is just a reference to the Open Government License instead. So you'll see, yeah, if you click here, view license information. And you can just, yeah, sorry, if you just click on here, down here. And you just need to put this statement in. You'll see here, if the information provided does not provide a specific attribution statement, you must use the following. So you can just put this, or you can put the Environment Agency attribution statement. So I could just copy this and bring it in, but use the Environment Agency one where it's there. And there you've got your plan. So sorry, you just need to edit this a bit as well, just to make sure it's a bit tidy. You see, it's not very clear. You can't really read that above that. So again, you can just edit this text box. So you can add a frame, you can add a background, you can add a margin, just to make it a bit clearer, resize the box a bit so it's a bit tidier. And there's also the option to add labels. There's a text box here, so you might want to add a label. Label the river. We've called it Main River. You might want to rename the whole layer Main River, but you could also, if you've got several water courses, you might want to rename them. So I could just put River Windrush, which is the one here. And again, you can just edit the box. There's tools here for editing the properties. Just edit the alignment, edit the justification, edit the positioning. And there you go, you've got a nice, just make it tidy, make it neat. And there you go, that's a nice plan here. So once you've got that done, that's your first plan, you've got your site location plan done, which is great. You can then PDF it. So save the plan, and then you can export it as a PDF. You can ignore the fact that the North Arrow is not linked to map because we don't tend to rotate the map. You can link it if you want. You can do that by going in here, go to North Arrow, you can link it to the map, sync with map, and then you can set it with the map. As I say, in this instance, the map's already pointing north, so it's not going to move. But if for whatever reason you've rotated the map somehow, then the North Arrow will then move with the orientation of the map. Then what you can do is you can PDF. So you're going to have to PDF them one at a time. So create your first plan, which is site location plan, and then export it to PDF. So in our, we'll just save it to your relevant project file. So we're calling it drawing 01. We're calling it site location plan. It's already called it that based on what we've named this layout. And then you click save. Just ignore this. This is all fine. It's just kind of standard settings. And it will then say that it's produced a PDF. So I can click on this and it should open up the PDF. So I'll just show you in Windows Explorer. So this is the PDF it's created based on what we've just created in QGIS. So it's quite tidy. We've got the site location, we've got the main river, we've got all the details on there, drawing number, flood protection solutions. It looks quite a tidy plan. And we want to do this and present all the data that we've collected in QGIS really. So what we can then do is we've got the layout set up, so we don't really want to waste the fact that we've set up this layout. So we can then basically duplicate it. But again, it will only bring in the data what's currently live in the workspace. So the second one, I'm also going to call the site location plan because I'm going to use the OS data. And as you see it's brought in the data as it was before. but I want to edit the data. So rather than satellite, I want to use the OS data. But I'm going to leave the river layer data on. So I can go back in my new plan. I can refresh that, and it'll bring in the OS data. So you'll see it's a bit grainy actually here. So maybe the scale's not quite right. Maybe we do need to zoom out a bit on this plan. So again, you'll see it's, for some reason, it's slightly altered the scale when we've duplicated it, but maybe we need to zoom out a bit anyway. So maybe we'll go 1 to 5,000 on this plan because it might be a bit clearer. And that gives us, a better understanding of the data in the wider area. We can move our label, we can delete our label if we don't want it. We need to edit this. We need to edit a few things though. So, I'm going to get rid of the label in this case. It's not really useful. For the legend, what's happened here is it's tried to bring in the whole OS data, which isn't really very helpful. That doesn't really show us anything. So what we can do is we can edit the legend and what data's in there. So if we untick auto update, it's brought in that data by itself. If we untick that, we can manually remove layers. So if I go down to the OS layers, select the layer I want to remove, and select this minus icon, I can remove it. And that then disappears, and we've got a much tidier legend. There's a couple of other things we want to amend. So we want to make it sure it's tidy. So the scale bar's shifted across because it has adjusted. So we just want to bring that back in. We need to amend the drawing number. So we're now on drawing 2. And if the drawing title's changed, we also need to change that. The other thing to check is make sure, again, check the drawings in the middle, but also check that the attribution statement's right. So in this instance, we still got the main river data, but we don't have the Google data anymore. It's the OS data. So we need to make sure we've got the right attribution statement for the OS data. So we can go back into the OS website and check that we're using the right data, the right statement. So if we go back, so if we're going back to map district. So again, this is covered by the open government license, but it wants you to include, their specific reference as well, which is this one, which contains OS data, Crown copyright, and database right. So we can bring that in. So we can replace the Google's attribution statement with the OS one in this instance. And there we go, we've got a second plan. So, that's quick to do. We just edited a few things, changed the layers in the workspace, and we can PDF that as well. We've got plan number 2 done, which is great. Plan number 2. I'm just going to show you a couple more. You've got to try and get the data to show clearly. So I'm going to do lidar data next. So again, we can duplicate the layout, and we're going to do lidar data. So it's duplicated the plan again, which is great. This is going to be plan number 3. We need to change the drawing title, lidar data. We've still got the OS data. We've still got public sector information. The lidar data is public sector information, so that's fine. Again, just check online if you're unsure. We've downloaded the data from here. So just check the license, or check when you go and download the data from here. Sorry, that one. Details. When you go to download the data from here, it should tell you what attribution statement you need to use. Yeah, so it's just saying you just need to use the open government license here for this one, which is fine. So we need to show the lidar data. So go back into our workspace. We can leave. Perhaps I tend to find showing the lidar data above the OS map works better. So we've got our lidar data down here, and you'll see that's appeared, so that's fine. And make sure it's above the OS data. And we've added a bit of transparency so we can see through it. Again, we can go back in here, select our map, just refresh the map. There's a refresh tool here. So it brings in the lidar data. You'll see I haven't brought in the lidar data for the tile to the south. So actually we don't want to leave this here because it looks a bit odd. There's a boundary. So maybe we zoom back in on the site a bit. So let's change the scale. Let's go 1 to 3,000. Where possible, try and use a consistent scale, but depends what you're showing and what you need to show. So that again, this is showing it quite well. We can see clearly distinctions between ground levels around from where the site is. The one thing that we probably want to edit here is we haven't edited the name in the workspace. So we could go back and edit the name of the layer here. But we can also manually edit the name within the layout itself. So again, in the legend properties here, we can find the lidar layer, and there's a little pencil tool. It won't let you do this if you've got the auto update on. So auto update, then untick auto update. Auto update only show items inside map, but untick auto update to allow you to then edit the layer. Again, it's showing that layer again. So we want to get rid of that tile. And for this layer, we want to call it's lidar data. And it's in, we can add a new line, and it's in meters. You know, we want to add the units, meters above ordnance. And go back, you see there's an extra bit here, you know, it's called, there's a band 1 layer, which again we don't really want. That's not really adding anything, so we can just remove that. You know, you select all these individual items here, but select band 1 and just get rid of it. We don't need that. You'll also notice that because I've just typed that, it's gone outside of the box. So maybe just to make it look tidy, it might be better rather than putting it on a separate line, just to reduce the font. So you can go in, there's again within the legend properties, you can go down and edit the font. So maybe just lower the font size, everything by a couple of sizes, and then everything is relatively consistent, a bit tidier. You know, it's a bit neater. And again, so now we've got the lidar data there. So that again, that's looking pretty tidy. That's looking pretty good. Again, so make sure once you've done that, to PDF it 03 lidar data. What we then want to do is we want to carry on producing these plans. We want to produce a set of plans for everything, really. So I'm not going to go through every one now. It's a matter of preference, but always try and make them look tidy. You can look at previous reports in terms of what data we presented. Typically, I find that when we're presenting the flood risk data, it's better to have the Google satellite in the background, because that helps you reference specific locations, you know, specific buildings within and adjacent to the site. So, you know, when you add the flood zone 2 and 3 extents, you know, the next one I would do would be the flood map for planning, would be drawing 4, and show these layers and produce the next one plan, duplicate again, make sure you reference the attribution statement for the layers, and update the legend and make sure the scale and everything's correct. And then drawing 05, I would typically do would be the historic flood map. Again, the order doesn't matter too much, but you kind of want it to flow naturally. So giving an idea of the site background, giving an idea of the general flood mapping, the historic flood mapping, and then the specific detailed flood mapping, I tend to find is a good way to run through things. So we can show the historic flood map. Again, that's not shown very clearly. So maybe think actually maybe we need to change that layer a little bit. It's not quite sharp enough. So maybe we go a darker blue. That's a bit clearer, you know, darker blue, purplish. You know, we can clearly see the outlines of the historic flood extent. So maybe that's, you know, play around with it, make sure it appears clearly. And then once we've done that, we want to start showing the individual model data, Bluebeam model data where available. And this is where you might need to produce a number of plans. Obviously, if you've got flood extents, such as these, we could probably show all these on one plan. You know, we could show the 1 in 100 year, 15, 20, 35, and 70% climate change scenarios all on one plan and show the extents. But when we've got individual model scenarios that include the depths, we're going to have to show these on separate plans. We can't show 2 depth scenarios on the same plan because they overlap each other. And the data's not clear. You know, we wouldn't be able to interrogate or make use of the data in that form. So we might have to prepare a single plan that combined shows extents. You might have to prepare a couple if they've run lots of scenarios. You might do a plan showing the 2%, the 5%, the 20%. Sorry, 1 in 2 year, 1 in 5 year, 1 in 20 year, 1 in 50 year, all on one plan, and then show all the 100 year climate change scenarios on one plan, and then maybe just show the extreme scenarios, 200 year, 1000 year on another plan. So you might have 3 plans showing extents, and then show the flood depths where possible. Again, you might not want to show all of them. You know, there might be lots of data here. So again, it's picking the ones which are most relevant to the site. You know, you might have the 1 in 2 year flood depth that isn't shown to affect the site. So maybe exclude that one. But all the 1 in 100 year ones here are showing to affect the site. So it's probably good to do a separate plan for each of these. And once we've done those, it's then the risk of flooding from surface water. So again, these will need a separate plan because the data overlaps. So do a plan showing the risk of flooding surface water depth for the 1 in 30 year, for the 1 in 100 year, and the 1 in 1,000 year. Again, 3 separate plans. And then finally, you want to look at the flood alert and flood warning areas. Again, you might want to zoom out a bit on this one. So you can clearly see kind of the extent of the areas relative to the site, what areas surrounding the site or nearby the site might be covered. The site might not be covered by a flood warning area, but there might be somewhere half a mile upstream which is, or half a mile downstream that is. So it's useful to get the context of that. So yeah, take a look, zoom out. And again, I tend to use the OS layer. I don't think it matters too much, but I think that's useful for understanding, you know, street locations and things, which can be useful when determining which areas are covered by warnings or not. So in total, you should have, you know, a minimum, if there's no flood model data there, I would expect there'd probably be at least 7 or 8 plans. If it's not in a flood warning area, if it's not in an area shown on the flood map for planning, or near anywhere as a fluvial risk, there might only be a few. But it just depends what data we've got available and how the site's been affected and what areas at risk, really. So try and present as much data as you can. And it's a really good addition to our due diligence, our home buyers reports and our FRAs. And you can use, as I've shown you, we can use GIS to interrogate those data sets. So look at the flood depths, look at the flood extents. You know, one of the more basic ways of assessing potential flood depths, if we weren't to have detailed modelling, is to kind of review flood extents against the lidar data. So in GIS, you know, we can open up this flood extent. Say if we didn't have model flood depths for this, we could open up the extent here, and we know that the flooding affects up to this area. So the flooding is going to reach a ground level at this location here. So I can click there and interrogate the ground level. So we know that the flooding at that location is roughly at a level of 81.7. So in this scenario, depending, you know, we can look at the ground levels at the site. What the ground levels at the site are 81.6 there, 81.3. So we're expecting, say, in this back corner of the site where the ground levels are 81.3, but we've assessed that the extent of flooding is about 81.7. We expect that the depth of flooding should be about 0.4 on that assessment. It's a very crude assessment, but we could check it. We've got the data here to check it. So we open up this data and we can check the depths here, and there it is, 0.4. So that matches up exactly with what that very high level assessment we've just done. So we might not have the flood depth data, but we can make a good judgment of what the potential flood depths might be at a site using an assessment of the flood extents and the lidar. So it just depends what data we've got available, depending on what level of assessment we need to do. But you know, there's always ways where we can make good estimates, and that just proves it in that instance, where simply just looking at the flood extents against the lidar is able to give us a good estimation of the flood depth of the site. Again, for that assessment, we kind of consider, you've got to consider kind of cross sections of the site. That's how it's been modelled, of the river, sorry. So there'll be, you know, perpendicular cross sections of the river is how it will have been modelled. So we'll you know, take a cross section through the river, through the site, and then find the flood level at the flood extent, find the ground level at the flood extent, and then bring that back to assess the potential level at the site, and then interpolate the depths on that basis. So a lot of information I've run through very quickly. I was just going to mention, for sites in Wales, there's different data sets. You don't go through the data.gov portal. There's other websites. So there's this website called LLLE. It is migrating over to a new data website. And I'll just search this one. So for LiDAR in Wales, if you search LLE LiDAR composite dataset, and this website's a little bit different. So You'll see there's a different attribution statement for natural resources Wales, so make sure if you're using this data to download it. And again, there's a different browser where you can select the data which you want to download. So again, we usually want the DTM data set. So you'll see the coverage here. So you can zoom in and see whether there is data relevant to your site. You'll see there's some higher resolution data sets here, 25 centimeters, but they only cover very small areas. You know, the chances we've got a site in one of those areas, you know, it'd be great if we did, because the data's that sort of ground level data, 25 centimeter resolution is really detailed. That's great. But the chances are that it's available is pretty slim. So, you know, 1 meter covers a good area. You'll see there's lots of areas in Wales which, you know, central Wales don't have any lidar data, so we might not be able to use it. 2 meter data, I'd expect there's probably a bit more coverage, hopefully. Yeah, there's, you know, almost all of Wales there is covered in 2 meters, so, you know, at least we've got some data, even if it's not very high resolution. And then we can download the data through this website, which is, if we go back on here, again, if you have to go back on here to download the data. So we've managed to view the data, whether it covers our site, and then you need to go back into here, which was clicking on the downloads link, which sends you through to another website, and then find the relevant data set. So we want the, you know, the 1 meter DTM, and then you can either download the full data set again, specific data set if possible, find your site or find your grid square, and then download it. What I have found recently on this website actually is in Chrome, I'm not sure in other browsers, it doesn't download when you click the link. So if I click on here, you want the ASC file, but you'll see it hasn't started down. I've clicked it and it hasn't started downloading. So what you need to do is, you'll see when you go in here and you click, so I've selected this yellow square here. And when you go to click the download ASC, what you need to do is there, you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen here. So down here, just wait for it to reappear when I hover. What you'll need to do is you'll need to type that web address in manually into your browser, and then it will download the file, because the link, clicking the link in here in Chrome, at least, I'm not sure about other browsers, but in Chrome, it doesn't download. So you need to type that whole address. So lle.blob.core.windows.net/lidar/1 meter _res_so01_DTM.zip, and then it will download the lidar file for you. So it's a bit convoluted, but it's just one of those quirks of using this. And then in terms of just other NRW data, so NRW blob map. So you can just search it and it should come up. So again, we can go into the natural resources website. There is a new, as I say, the LLE data is moving across to a new portal. I'm not sure if it's got it on here actually. If you go on LLE, the LLE homepage, yeah, you'll see here. So there's this new website here called Data Map Wales, but not all the data has gone across here yet. So I tend to still use the LLE website, but you might be able to find the data on here as well. So lidar, whether something comes up, I'm not sure. There's no data. So again, everything's being migrated across there, but I'm not sure how long until everything is there. So everything's still on the LLE website. You see there's a historic lidar archive, but whether that's the most recent data, it might not be. So again, you can download all of the flood map layers. I'm not sure if you can do that on here. So flood map. So you see, yeah, so you've got some flood map for planning, areas benefiting from defences flood layers. So you can download those through here. And again, just build up a database for the data sets in Wales. It's similar to the data.org website. It gives you the attribution statement you need to use. And you can download the spatial data. Shapefile is best. Shapefile, zip shapefile, unzip it, and bring it into QGIS. So all the data, all the data that you often see on these maps online, long-term flood risk, flood map for planning, both in England and Wales, all that data is available online to download, and we can bring it into our own plans and make our own tidy plans and annotate it and make it a bit clearer and site specific, which our clients tend to appreciate. And certainly for FRAs through the planning process, that can be quite useful. So I'm aware I've thrown a lot of information at you, and there are lots more things you can do in GIS more than what I've done. There are options you could add in here. You can add secondary maps into your layout. You might want to add a secondary map where you've got a different scale and you're more zoomed out. And again, you can edit it, and you've got an inset map showing a specific location or something in a slightly different area. And you can do all these sorts of things. So there are tools. Again, you need to add a separate scale and things like that to make it clear what the inset scale is. But there's lots of things you can play around with. There's lots of good information online to help with QGIS because it's an open source piece of software. If you just search what you're trying to do, a lot of the time there's help and troubleshooting available online, or speak to colleagues who should be able to assist. So I'm going to end the recording here, and I will call you back in a second, Ahmed, just so we've got a clear recording. Oh, sorry, I'm not sure I'm just going to stop recording.